Jason Shurburtt joins us each and every single Thursday from the Big Spur inside Gamecocks. Check him out. JC, great to see you again, my friend. Appreciate you having me on your show this morning. And again, always a pleasure to chat with you here on this Thursday. What's going on, my friend? How are you?
Absolutely. Been looking forward to this segment all week, man. And certainly after you left on our chat box line or whatever, you got a lot of compliments. Feel like, hey, Chris is my favorite guest, things like that. So, man, good things are happening with these segments. But, yeah, certainly looking forward to this game Saturday. And, the start of SEC play is always special, I think, for any program in South Carolina as well. And, I know a lot of Gamecocks are going out to Fayetteville. First time they've been out there since 2013. And hopefully they'll have a nice trip and come home victorious. But
I was going to say, man, hopefully a similar trip to the last time, because I was just looking back at those highlights. I was like, my God, it just goes to show how good those teams were. I mean, we just beat the brakes off of Arkansas with the Connor Shaws and the Ellingtons and the Demir Birds and the Clownies, and the list just goes on and on.
And I mean, in that game too, it was like, I think the run defense that year, gosh, was a little suspect, I think, heading out there. And so people kind of worried. Arkansas ran it right down the field, scored a touchdown. And then I think they had a turnover that cost them, and it unraveled for the Razorbacks and Brett Bielema from there. I mean, that was and Spurrier, of course, had the famous quote afterwards. I feel sorry for Arkansas getting beat like that on homecoming. He kind of smirked, like, why'd you schedule us for homecoming? But that was the last time they've been out there. Of course, one game since then in 2017. That was kind of a turnover game. South Carolina had Sky Moore and TJ Brunson had big days, 48-22 there. So, Carolina in the last three games has really gotten the best of Arkansas. They've beat them pretty good, but different program right now for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, like you mentioned, again, it's interesting. Gamecocks are on a 3-game winning streak in this series, and of course, we used to play them every single year. And because of the expansion of the conference, that's no longer. I think many of us probably wish we could trade out A&M to play Arkansas again. No disrespect to the Razorbacks, but it just hasn't gone well playing A&M. JC, obviously, I want to spend the majority of your segment today talking about that game this weekend. Before we do, though, let's just really quickly look back. The season opener, Gamecocks get a 21-point victory, 35-14 over Georgia State, start 1-0. And that is the main takeaway. But obviously not, as you saw, not all 21-point wins are built equally. You don't want to overreact to week one. We've heard all week the greatest improvements from week 1 to week 2. Bottom line, you're 1-0. But just really quickly, what were your main takeaways? Anything major stand out to you from that first game?
Well, I think South Carolina beat a good football team. I think Georgia State will have a good year, even if – will they win the Sun Belt? That's in question. Will they beat North Carolina this weekend? I think they'll put up more than 14 points on Gene Chizik's defense. I can tell you that right now at home. Yeah. But, the outcome was fine. I mean, I think most people's prediction, and I got a little ahead of myself last Friday and said I'm going to go with my 51-point deal. I was totally wrong. I'll just admit it. Even breaking down the game, I was wrong about what would happen and stuff. But I think most people had that score prediction. I mean, South Carolina covered a 12.5-point spread. Obviously, the special teams with 2 block punts were huge in the football game. And I thought the run defense held up better, maybe more consistently than expected. I thought, and like you said earlier, 200 yards, 200 yards. You still got to plug the lead, so to speak. But, 7 3-and-outs, I think, in 13 drives. I mean, against a team like Georgia State that wants to, keep running what they do and eventually it'll work and drive you to death and drive up and down the field, that's the answer, force 3-and-outs. So I thought, it was a good, solid opener for the defense. I thought the linebackers looked vastly improved. Secondary will get more of a test this week, obviously, but I thought they played fine. And we'll see about the pass rush because this is kind of another one of those games where it's not really a blitzing type game. It's more of a containment type deal. You got to contain KJ Jefferson. But overall, man, and look, I've seen all the stuff, all the videos you put up on your social media channels and stuff about the atmosphere and the lights. And, just as a quick aside here, hats off to everybody that was involved with that because – and also the 80,000 fans for showing up. I mean, that South Carolina hadn't been getting that many for a Sun Belt team, right? And so I think, hats off to everybody involved in the atmosphere and everything else. The one thing, obviously, that was disappointing was the way the offense performed, the yardage, just the real kind of cattywampus play by the line and the blockers in general. So I think it was a lot to coach on, a lot to correct. I think that the offensive line will just have to see. I think in terms of perimeter blocking, that stuff can be cleaned up. I mean, that's something that I think Marcus Satterfield said it this week. They worked on it in practice all week. That can be cleaned up, and I think maybe, Chris, if we would have all understood too, the O-line was not good because of the rushing attack and all that. But maybe if they'd gotten better perimeter blocking the other night, some of those screen passes that were 1-2 yards or losses, they could have been huge gains. I mean, because we didn't see the Gamecock receivers really break into the open field at any point.
Right.
And so I think you can clean those up. You can have a more successful passing attack, but obviously, still the run game's a big concern. And you're dead on arrival in this league if you can't run the football. I mean, you have to be able to run it at least to a certain extent. So, but all in all, look, first games are funny. You take them if they're wins, and you're glad you didn't shockingly lose like Tennessee did a couple of years ago. You're glad that you got out of there with a win.
Yeah, for sure. And JC, speaking to your point, by the way, on the atmosphere, because I was in there, I tell you, man, truly kudos to Gamecock Nation. I mean, that had a feeling of like the 2010-13 type of crowds where it was just jam-packed every single week. It was a lot of fun, man. That atmosphere was absolutely electric, and obviously you hope for a positive result, aka a win this weekend, because Georgia will be that and much, much more in a little less than 2 weeks. Let's move to this weekend. Obviously, JC, again, the SEC opener. We'll talk first outside of the game itself. This series between South Carolina and Arkansas, because you're looking at the Gamecocks. There's some series they have with their SEC teams that, a little bit lopsided just due to history, to whatever reasons. You look at this one, though, I think it's Arkansas leads the series 13-10, if I remember correctly, but the Gamecocks have won 3 in a row. But a really good competitive back-and-forth series. Obviously, you've covered the Gamecocks for a long time. Just your thoughts on this game returning and what you remember vividly from when South Carolina has played the Razorbacks, because it seemed like they'll get Carolina a couple years in a row. We get them a couple years in a row. But, from what I recall, when this was a yearly game, this was always one I felt like you could look at. You always felt like that was going to be a really hard-fought competitive football game.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's always these two teams kind of because they did play every year from 92 to 2013, right? And so these two teams always, I think, kind of look at each other as, oh, man, we got to go play Arkansas, or, oh, man, we got to go play South Carolina. And there was intent behind why Carolina played Arkansas. It was because they both came in the league at the same time.
Right.
It seems like at times, if you're, a South Carolina person, that the SEC doesn't do you any favors with the scheduling, but they do try to be fair. I mean, they matched up. The first two permanent opponents from the West for Carolina were Mississippi State and Arkansas, whereas other schools, I think Florida had Auburn and LSU. So they do try to match that, and that's something to look for when they redo the scheduling here pretty soon. But then it just seems like when an Arkansas does come on the schedule, or when they roll off, or a Mississippi State rolls off, they go from like historically good and winning division titles to they're the worst team in the SEC for 2 years in a row, Right. And then the Gamecocks, A&M shuffles on, and A&M was a 6-6 team coming out of the Big 12, and then that first year they had a guy named Johnny Manziel, and all of a sudden they're great, But it's you think back to it, the first game they played. And this was Sparky Wood's second to last year. Was the Tannehill year where he took over middle of the season. Carolina, that beginning of that year they were god awful. It was their first year in the SEC. They had Georgia as the opener. They had Georgia down 6-0 at half. Georgia had Garrison Hurst and those guys ended up winning 28-6. Arkansas comes to town. Arkansas had just lost to the Citadel. Okay, and they fired Jack Crow right after that game. They're like, no more. And so I think Joe Kynes took over as the interim, And for those of you who don't know who Joe Kines is, he was the interim coach at Bama for the bowl game before Saban came in. He's got that real famous, hey, we got to get out of here. Just look it up, Alabama loud coach. Yeah. And so Kines took over as the interim, and they hired a defensive consultant named Danny Ford and brought him out there and put him on staff after they fired Crow. And so then they come to Columbia, and I think a lot of people thought, hey, this team just lost at the Citadel. South Carolina should beat them. It was a waxing 45-7. So right off the bat, this series was like Arkansas smacked Carolina in the face. Weird games, like Brad Scott, his first year. Nobody ever talked about Brad Scott's teams playing defense. They shut Arkansas out 14-0. It was one of those weird games where Carolina couldn't score. That was one of Danny Ford's teams. The Houston Nutt, Lou Holtz thing where like they moved that game to Little Rock because of Lou, when he was here. Gamecocks actually played out instead of Fayetteville. They played in Little Rock from like 97 to 03. I'll never forget Kenny McKinley. One of the best plays he ever made, the late Kenny McKinley in his career, was when Spurrier was the coach. And in his first season, South Carolina, I think they had just beaten Tennessee on the road. They got to Arkansas, and that had not been a pretty place for the Gamecocks. And I think Oris Lambert picked off a pass midfield, and in classic Spurrier fashion, play action, deep post. Kenny called it. Gamecocks won, and I believe that clinched bowl eligibility, and that was a big deal that year. Guys like Matt Jones, who Carolina could never stop. Madre Hill had a record-setting game against the Gamecocks in the early 90s. Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, Peyton Hillis, we all know the score there. And then something about those Spurrier teams, the good ones, that doesn't get talked about a lot. Bobby Petrino owned them.
I remember 2010, like the SEC East, like we just got smacked by them at home.
Right. Yeah. And then went to Florida and smacked them the next week.
Right.
And then out there in 2011, Devin Taylor actually Devin Taylor had a great pick six in that game. Still, 44-28. That was the one team and one coach. Yeah. In Ellis Johnson's career at South Well, he just had trouble. Then we know what happened to Petrino. Nobody was sad to see him go. And John L. Smith takes over for the year, and they're not that good. And that's the famous DJ Swearinger game.
Who cares?
Who cares? Oh, and that game was actually on CBS for whatever reason. And then, like you said, the 52-7, and then the one game with Bolima with Will's team. So that's I've been out there once. That was in 2009. South Carolina lost that one too, Petrino. But it's a good fan base. I think when they were playing every year, everybody kind of got used to each other. Kind of, hey, you're a South Carolina guy. Obviously, in baseball, there have been some epic battles, including the College World Series in 2012, the Super Regional a few years back, Kingston's first year. So these schools are familiar with each other. It's the series, though, I think it's just been one of those interesting SEC type things where, you're kind of thrown in, and all of a sudden you develop a new team you're kind of concerned about every season. And I doubt they're going to put Arkansas back on the schedule when they redo everything. I kind of think it's going to be Mississippi. It could be Mississippi State again, but I don't see Arkansas, with Texas and everybody out there as potential permanent opponents. But it's been a good series, and kind of back and forth, and one of those things, Chris, where there's been some pretty unexpected outcomes.
Yeah, and again, two programs, I think, JC, that are sort of, at least right now, pretty similar. You look at the head coaches, both cultural fits of their respective schools, and both programs sort of trying to have those, have breakout seasons. I guess Arkansas has had theirs last year, but both programs that feel like they're on the up and up, they're on the rise and trying to get to that next level. Let's move to the game, obviously, this weekend, JC, a huge one, a big one, great opportunity. It's a big game for both schools for their own respective reasons. Let's start offensively, though. That's where everything was left to be desired, right? Coming out of the season opener, I've never left a 21-point victory with the mixed emotions, that I really had. And I tell people this, and I know some have gotten sick of it, and they probably think I'm an insufferable asshole at this point, but I've never ranted so much on a Monday show after a 21-point victory, but just because of the high expectations and hopes of the offense and the struggles of the offensive line, the one thing we wanted to see play well in week one. But I'll ask you this. how much different do you expect the offense to look this weekend? Because it feels like almost there was this specific game plan for Georgia State because of what they do. I'd have to imagine that's revamped and rehauled, or overhauled somewhat at least. What are you expecting from this Gamecocks offense? Obviously, it's an Arkansas defense that gave up over 300 passing yards to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati, high-quality football team. But I feel like the Gamecocks have certainly got the playmakers and the athletes, the skill position players to have a lot of success. A lot of it will come back, though, that offensive line. We saw the talent of Spencer Rattler, him throwing on the run, his pure passing ability. Just overall, what are you expecting from this Gamecocks offense? Do you expect a massive amount of improvement? How do you think they should attack Arkansas this weekend?
My expectations are that they get better. I mean, they got to get their act together, so to speak, right? And a lot of times between game one and game two, you do that. I'll say this about Georgia State's defense: South Carolina's not the first SEC team that struggled with those guys and their style of play. But the other two teams that struggled ended up not being very good teams. I think Tennessee, when they lost, they finished their year pretty good, didn't really beat anybody, finished 8-5, and then Auburn fell apart last season, as we all know. So I hope that's not an ominous sign. So I do think, though, that their style of play does present some challenges. It seemed to me like Marcus Satterfield in his press conference Wednesday was just kind of ready to flush it and move on. I do think South Carolina has better players on offense than last year by a mile. I think they showed that they have more weapons. I think they have the weapons to go out there and put points on the scoreboard. I think they're better than Cincinnati talent-wise. I mean, honestly, just to be honest. Now, will they block as well as Cincinnati? I mean, you're talking about the Bearcats. That's Luke Fickell's probably not going to put up with bad blocking and, a bunch of those Midwestern offensive line guys. And in talking to our Arkansas insider Trey Biddy this week, he said he was surprised at how big Cincinnati was. They were not small. But my expectations are, look, man, you've got Spencer Rattler, you've got Juice Wells, you got Josh Vann and Austin Stogner, who I'm hoping we'll hear more from this week. Jalen Brooks obviously had a great game. You've got Amari and Brown you can send deep, a really fast guy. You got really good backs. There's no excuse. I would understand if this were Georgia, they were going to play this week, and the defense that the Dogs put on the field last week. But Arkansas, it's kind of they won kind of like they normally do. They give up some points. They'll bleed the clock on you. They'll run the football. They'll surprise you with some gadget plays. And they end up, it's 30-20 type deal, a lot of the time. So, to me, there's no reason why South Carolina can't go out there and show, pretty dramatic improvement on offense this week.
I was going to say, JC, do you feel like the Gamecocks, are they capable of winning in spite of the offensive line? Like if it's just not there, again, I'm not saying the level we saw in week one, but let's just say for whatever reason, the offensive line doesn't perform the way we'd like to yet again. One of the things that rings out to me from the previous regime, stay stingy in the run game. Well, it looks like to me Arkansas's defense is susceptible to pass. I mean, do you get to a point where you sort of just scrap that and say, hey, if we've got to throw it 50 times to win, we'll go do it? I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, does the offensive line have to take a major jump to have any shot in this game?
Well, I mean, the problem I think is going to happen, Chris, is if they don't, you're not going to be able to run the ball. So it would be nice if they could, yes, but if you got to throw it, good coaches, if they have to throw it 50 times to win, they will, right? That's the bottom line. This is not an experimental lab. And I said that about Will Muschamp's last defense in South Carolina. I was like, this is not an NFL training facility. This is a college football program, and you need to win. And that's the bottom line. You can develop all the individual talent you want. That your players can go to the league and be prepared all you want, but if you're not winning, you're not really serving your purpose. And so it's a situation where if they don't get a push in the run game, I think they can get some things going in the throw game. But what concerns me is if Arkansas starts getting pressure with 3,
Right.
and then they're going to drop 8. That's what Barry Odom loves to do. They did it to Ole Miss in 2020. Matt Corral threw 6 interceptions in that game. And Arkansas was able to get pressure with 3. Now, they've got talent on their D line, but they're some newcomers. They're guys like that played at LSU last year, like Landon Jackson or Terry Hampton, who I really like as a nose tackle from Arkansas State that they got out of the portal. They had a really good class from the portal, Chris, just like Carolina did. And so these guys are still kind of feeling their way a little bit. They're banged up in the secondary. Obviously, you don't just replace Catalan because he's elite, but Latavius Brini, who started 12 games at Georgia last year, is his backup. So you have that SEC experience in terms of depth. So in my opinion, injured in the secondary or not, if they're able to get pressure with 3, it's going to be a long day because you're not only not going to be able to run it, you're going to have Spencer running for his life all day. And unlike Georgia State, that kind of gambled, and maybe there's some opportunities downfield, Arkansas is going to have the zone flooded, and that obviously can lead to picks and a throwaway at best. So that's the issue is if Arkansas, and they'll try to do it, they'll try to get pressure with 3, and if they don't, then they'll start creeping up, sending somebody, and that's good, But that's my biggest concern in terms of. What could derail the passing game on Saturday for Carolina and all that. That's it shouldn't be that hard for 5 to block 3, right? But it is at times, and if they get pressure with that, that's not going to be good.
Yeah. And a guy I feel like, JC, before we move to the other side, we need to mention Bumper Pool for Arkansas. Number 1 is going to set their career tackles record this season very soon, probably. And number 2, one of the best names in college football, Bumper Pool. And you talk about great linebackers. He's certainly up there, man. He's a lot of fun to watch what he does for them.
Yeah, Bumper Pool and Storm Duck from Boiling Springs, who plays in North Carolina. Those 2 are great names, but he's a heck of a linebacker. They got another kid, Drew Sanders, that came in from Alabama.
Yeah.
That's an NFL guy in the future, I think. They've got players on that defense, but it's a little leaky against the pass, just to be honest. And if South Carolina can find a way to manufacture a run game, that's even better because then, they're not going to be able to really, try to come after you and do stunts. I mean, they're going to have to respect the run and creep up, and then you can go over the top. And, that's when you get to test some of these newcomers in their secondary.
Yeah. JC, let's move to the other side of the football, and we'll start again with quarterback play. I think the quarterback matchup in this one's awesome with Rattler going against KJ Jefferson. Jefferson, big body guy, 6'4", 240. You look at his stat line last week. I mean, he's not just a guy that's going to beat you on the ground. 18 of 26, 223, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also ran 18 times for 62 yards in the score. And, JC, of course, we all know about the Gamecocks, just glowing history against dual threat quarterbacks, right? Especially big body ones. Just talk about, though, KJ Jefferson's game specifically, what you think about him overall, and how do the Gamecocks attack him? Do they have to make him? I would believe they've got to make him one-dimensional.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get – Shane Beamer said it best today. You got to get him on the ground. I mean, he's not Cam Newton, Chris, because very few people are like the college Cam Newton.
Right.
But similar to Cam, you'll see defenders bounce off of him, and not be able to get him down. They'll have it.
I noticed that watching the highlights, man. They'd hit him about 3-4 yards short of the stick, and it's almost like they just deflected right off him. And he's a tough guy to bring down for sure.
Yeah, and he gets what I like to call miscellaneous yards. That means, to me, and this is just like a Shurburttism. I just kind of like what I think. You'll have him stop. You'll think he got 5, but then he keeps steamrolling a little bit, and all of a sudden it's 8, and it's 3rd and 2. And when you're playing against a Kendall Briles offense, that's the most lethal thing that can happen to your defense is for them to be in like 3rd and 2, 2nd and 2, 2nd and short, any kind of short distance, because he can call anything he wants. And they've got so many little gadget plays and so many runs off of passes. Their tight end, Trey Knox, I think is elite. Yeah. You got to the best way to defend that stuff is to get them in 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9,
Yeah.
and then they become kind of a straight drop back passing team. They can still beat you doing that, but that's the best case scenario. Then you come after him, get him to run around, hopefully, and he will make a mistake from time to time. He's much better than he was last year throwing the ball and making reads. Their receiving core, though, Chris, has, and I like the matchup Carolina's DBs against their receiving core. A lot of name guys, right? Like Hasselwood and Warren Thompson and Matt Landers. They were all pretty highly regarded recruits, but their name, they haven't really, done what people expected them to do. Now, can they end up having a great year at Arkansas and putting up numbers? But they haven't to date. They didn't do it. They're old school. Didn't do it against Cincinnati. So I think it's the best case scenario for Carolina. 1st, 2nd down, you got to make sure they're not churning out rushing yardage and you get them in passing downs. And then you see, are these receivers really that good? And I think that, when you talk about the Carolina secondary, I think I like the matchup for the Gamecocks right now. I also had this about the dual threat guys. And, to Clayton White's credit, last year against Florida and in North Carolina, that's the one thing you want. You want to stop Sam Howell from running. You want to stop Emory Jones from running last year. I thought they had a great game plan in both of those games. We all rightfully so get nervous about the dual threat quarterbacks at Carolina because historically it has not gone well. But, I kind of look back on last year's D and how they played those two teams. And, frankly, I think something similar could work, similar to what they did against North Carolina. There's not a ton of difference between what Longo likes to do and what Kendall Browse likes to do. And so it's that similar style of attack. And so I would kind of expect Carolina to implement some concepts similar to what they did in the bowl game.
Yeah. Now, you talk about, again, that Arkansas offense, JC, outside of KJ Jefferson, and they've got very capable players, NFL type of guys, Rocket Sanders, of course, at running back. You mentioned Hazelwood. You mentioned Trey Knox. You mentioned Warren Thompson, some real big body guys. Outside of the obvious, which is the matchup with KJ and slowing him down, is there a specific matchup you're looking for when the Gamecocks defense is on the field that they need to win more often than not to have a shot to win this football game?
I think this is a huge football game for Zach Pickens and Boogie Huntley. And whoever else is in there at D-tackle, MJ Webb, Tonka Hemingway, you name it. Because Arkansas is one of the best offensive lines in the country. They're big, they're physical. They normally do, Chris. I mean, and Sam Pittman is their head coach. So I don't think their offensive line is going to do anything but get better over the years. That's a challenge because they can block. I mean, sometimes you watch them and KJ Jefferson has literally all day back there. Gets to run around, have a cup of coffee, take a nap. I mean, and South Carolina has to get pressure. This is not necessarily one of those games where I think, that Arkansas is going to throw it 50 times. And so it's blitz. But, there comes a point when they drop him back, he doesn't have anybody open. You got to get him on the ground or force him into making a mistake. And that's going to be up to, the interior of the defensive line to a certain extent, and also Jordan Birch and Jordan Strong. I thought Birch, surprisingly, I didn't expect him to play probably as well as he did Saturday night. So I think he needs to keep coming and keep taking another step. And they've got to be able to get off blocks. And they've got to be able to free the linebackers like Kaba and Johnson, to let them make tackles and play like they're capable. So that offensive line for Arkansas versus the D line for Carolina, it's a matchup I would favor the Hogs right now. But I don't think there's any reason why Carolina can't compete and at least make it like a stalemate against that bunch. And that would be awfully helpful, I think, in terms of disrupting their entire offense.
Yeah. JC, I'm glad you bring that up too, man, because I think that's a huge matchup too because of, we heard Shane Beamer all preseason, talk about the defensive tackles, how they're the best position group, maybe on the football team, right? The deepest. And so, if that's the case, if that's going to be the case this season, this is a game where they got to show up. You know what I mean? Like, this is a game where it's like, all right, well, you got all that praise in the preseason. Let's see why Coach Beamer was saying that. And again, it goes beyond them, of course. Everybody's got to do their job. But like you mentioned, it's a huge game for guys like Pickens, Huntley, Webb, Sanders, Barrett, Hemingway, list goes on and on and on. These guys to emerge and take over a football game like this. I know it's funny on a week-to-week basis, we don't give enough love to special teams. We don't talk enough about special teams, but I feel like, JC, we sort of have to. After what happened in week one, you block 2 punts, you make 2 50-plus yard field goals, you have a fake field goal, work successfully. I don't think there's a high probability that you block 2 punts again, but I think it's got to make you feel good, or it should make Gamecock fans feel good that going, week to week, that's a facet of the game. Maybe you can steal. And in a game like this, where you're a 9-point underdog, 8.5, whatever you're getting it at, that could be a difference maker in a game like this.
Absolutely. And on the road too. I mean, you steal one, you steal a possession, you steal a touchdown, a quick, cheap score. You're sitting there and, let's say you have a good drive, you're up 7-0, you get a stop, all of a sudden you block a punt and either get it deep inside their territory or score a touchdown. All of a sudden they start pressing because they're down on their home field 14-0 quickly. And they don't know what hit them. And you also talk about Kai Kroger and field position in this game. Arkansas, they have the ability to quick strike. Don't get me wrong. And it could happen, but they're not. They would much prefer 5-6 minute drives. Yeah. And so field position, if you can flip the field, is obviously big. In terms of kind of what they like to do. And obviously when you can kick 50-yard field goals, that means points, and things of that nature. And what I also think it does, Chris, is now after what happened last week, and I don't know how much time Sam Pittman spends on special teams. Coaches vary with how much emphasis they put on it. I know Steve Spurrier did not work teams a whole lot. Muschamp did, and of course Beamer does. But some coaches just don't emphasize it. So they have to spend more time during their limited practice time instead of repping offense and defense and all that, working special teams, because it can literally cost you the game if you don't kind of get ready for it. So I think there's kind of a strategy factor that plays into it too, just because of the limited amount of time you have in college football to prep for a game. Taking that extra time to make sure you don't have a catastrophe in your kicking game could cause you not to be able to pay as much of attention as you wanted to other aspects.
Yeah. Now, JC, just your overall vibe of this game. It's interesting. I'm very excited, cautiously optimistic, I might dare say. But certainly there are concerns, and, coming off the season opener, it's just game one, but you look at the matchups, and I was talking to you about this earlier this morning on you guys' show Inside the Gamecocks, that, I didn't love the matchup over the summer. I'm not sure there was really anything in week one that made me feel any better about it, right? Especially at the line of scrimmage, but a great opportunity for this football team. And I'm sure obviously, because, JC, you've got a feeling on the pulse of Gamecock Nation, the mood. And, I think the Gamecocks, from what I've heard, have sold out their ticket allotment. It's going to be a packed crowd at Razorback Stadium. And, fair or unfair, there are a lot of fans that are kind of putting almost all of their stock in this game for the season. And again, fair or unfair. And I think you and I would both agree that's not probably the way to attack it. But this is a game, no doubt, that serves as an opportunity. If you want to have a big year, if you can get this one, it sets you up to, I would say at minimum, overachieve from preseason expectations. I won't ask you to lock in a score prediction. If you want to do that, you're more than welcome. But you're just overall vibe and feeling going into this one. Again, where I stand, cautiously optimistic, great opportunity from what we saw week one. There are reasons to be concerned. There are real reasons, but either way, a great opportunity, SEC opener. Should be a lot of fun. Your overall vibe, though.
Yeah, it could reverse a lot of negative trends. I mean, South Carolina in front of a road crowd in the SEC, because in 2020 Vandy didn't allow fans in the stands, so it's like a bit like a scrimmage, right? So they did win that game on the road in the SEC, but since the win over Georgia in 19, right, 0 for 10 on the road in the league. Closest they came, I think, was Missouri last year, which was a very bitterly disappointing loss, in my opinion. So they could reverse the road trend.
So hold on, I'm gonna stop you. 0-10 in SEC road games.
Yeah,
since the start of 2020, is that correct?
Since the win over Georgia in 19.
God, That is
that big one of the biggest wins in school history rankings.
Right.
Everything.
Because I know it's 2-14, I guess, in the last 16 true road games, but I did not realize the 0-10 mark since.
Yeah.
That's alarming.
That's alarming. And I say it's really 1-11 because they did beat Vandy on the road, but I do.
Right.
That was the one school in the league that there were no fans in the stands. So, and to me, that's kind of like a scrimmage, you know. And Vandy played like it was a scrimmage, but it was, so there has to be something to stop this, right? And this is an opportunity to do it. I think you do this, you kind of get, sort of some breathing room, because I'm afraid if they lose this one, going to Kentucky on October 8th, this team's going to really be pressing against a team that has owned them basically, for 9 years. So, you kind of would like to get this one. I would not. I don't think. We talked earlier. You have to go with what you've seen, and not what you hope when you're picking a game. But I think that from what I've seen, I pick Arkansas. My overall general feel is Arkansas is just probably a little bit ahead of Carolina as a program right now. They've learned how to win. They've won some big ones, like they did last year. Carolina hadn't quite gotten there yet, but they could. Things changed in an instant in this game. That's why we love it. And so that would a win Saturday. That's what that would kind of mean for South Carolina. It would almost be just like Arkansas beating Texas last year and getting on that roll early, giving them the confidence to go ahead and continue to compete. And you get that confidence and you keep going and rocking and rolling. And, as far as Gamecock Nation goes, I think they'd just be happy to see some blocking and some points scored Saturday. I mean, honestly, the positivity from the beginning of the year hadn't been beaten back yet, but it's taken a blow a little. It's taken a little bit of a slap a little bit, after last week. And this group, this program, the school, heading into a titanic weekend, recruiting wise and everything else with Georgia the next weekend, getting a win here just ups the ante and really puts them, I think, ahead of schedule. And so, if they go out and execute and things are clicking on offense, I think they can have a big day and have a big win. Much respect for Arkansas, but they're not unbeatable. This is not Alabama. This is not Georgia last year. I'm still not convinced Georgia's as good as they were last year, even though they look like it. This matchup isn't even as brutal as like last year when they went to Tennessee and couldn't handle the tempo. I think it's a very evenly matched game talent-wise. It's going to come down to execution and coaching. Sometimes who wants it more? And those are the things that will decide the game.
JC Shurburtt of the Big Spur inside the Gamecocks. JC, one last thing before we get you out of here, and I know we'll touch on this probably even more in depth next weekend, or next week, I should say, because of the recruiting visits and everything that's going to be coming up. But anything to update on the recruiting side of things? I know once we get into the season, that sort of takes center stage, but obviously recruiting never stops. Anything of note that Gamecock fans should be aware of from the recruiting side of things?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you got Nicholas Harbor's official visit coming in next weekend. We touched on that, but something maybe people didn't know, Desmond Uziamulu, I mispronounced it.
Desmond U.
Big Tree Babalade, Sandy, the safety from all the DC area kids are going to come down for the Georgia game unofficially. And so I think that's big, because you have what 3 kids from the area already committed. And you got this 5-star Titanic recruit on campus, this 5-star, and I think sometimes recruiting, it gets contagious, right? And so it gives, sometimes when you have a bunch of guys that are really good, talented players, and then they got another one, and they're all going to South Carolina or wherever, it gives them permission, especially when you're dealing with a school like Carolina that's not, I don't want to call it off-brand, but it's not one of the big, brands in college football. So I think that's a big thing to watch next weekend for the Georgia game. I hope they keep Harbor and his family in the air conditioning, because get them a suite, man, after they go down for 2001 and all that, because it's going to be a scorcher.
Yeah. Translation from JC Shurburtt: pack out Willie B no matter what happens. And I know, again, we'll talk about this more next week, but definitely pack it out.
Yeah.
Make that atmosphere the best in the country when the Dogs come to town. But first, again, of course, this weekend against Arkansas, JC, we'll talk about it all next week. I appreciate you taking the time, my friend. It's always a pleasure, and look forward to doing it again next week.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Always fun, man. Looking forward to next week.
Yeah, man. Take care. Appreciate you, JC.